the question of American democracy, the way that people classically argue about this is, you'll talk about all kinds of problems with our political system. Conservatives will say, well, actually, that's fine because America is not supposed to be a democracy; it's a republic. It was designed as one. And then liberals will say, no, that's actually wrong. All that the founders meant and understood by republic is a system of representative governments, as opposed to Athens, which is, as we discussed, a more direct democracy. That is not true. The liberal response, I think, is historically not compelling. I think conservatives actually have the better side of the argument, which is one of the provocations of the book. Conservatives designed our institutions with reference to certain Republican ideals, and republicanism, for at the time of the founding, was not intrinsically democratic at all. You can go back to the Roman Republic, had certain popular features, but was not a representative democracy in the familiar sense at all. The Italian maritime republics in the Middle Ages and Renaissance were systems where you had a class of merchant oligarchs, voting and adjudicating things on the basis of sort of fair procedures from their perspective. But it wasn't democracy. All republicanism means, as I get into the book, is you have a kind of stable set of rules, you have procedures, you have a written constitution that govern how power is distributed, and that ideally protect certain interests or certain people in society from the domination of others. But that's not intrinsically democratic. In fact, the founders were part of what I think is a Republican tradition that was principally concerned or largely concerned with protecting property and protecting the interests of the wealthy from the masses, right? So the faction that they're trying to protect from domination is the wealthiest people in society, and they create institutions that help them do this in the middle of a political situation, as I talk about in the book also, where they thought that ordinary working class people in this country had done too much to threaten the stability of property, stability of contracts. By contrast, you can have a democratic republic where you say, no, like we're actually interested in representing, reflecting the interests of most people in society, and we're actually afraid of the domination of the wealthy over the masses more. So that's kind of the without getting into too much of the history lesson here. That's the broad strokes overview of why I think the system is fairly characterized as Republican, but not democratic, at least from a historical and theoretical perspective.
Yeah, our Constitution has all of these sort of counter-majoritarian locks and dams because, I agree with you. I think that they were terrified of the idea of like a show of hands determining government because, they understood themselves as being a minority. And if, the people who don't have property realize you can just vote for more rights or more property or their property, they were terrified of that. And you focus in particular on the Constitutional Convention and, figures such as Madison, Hamilton, and Edmund Randolph and their deep distrust of democracy. Can you talk about how the Constitution was often a bulwark against democracy rather than its enshrinement as a sacred value?
Sure thing. So I think the context people need to have is that, the American Revolution, which we talk about as, this exchange of like letters and documents and, people with cool pens writing a lot. It was actually a war. It was the most deadly war as a percentage of the population of any war in American history but the Civil War. 25,000 people die. And it totally devastates the colonial economy, or the early economy of what becomes the United States. The first 15 years of our existence as a country, I think gross national product falls by like 50%. So it's this huge depression, the worst until the Great Depression. And in response to that, poor people, farmers around the country are appealing to their state governments for relief. They're petitioning for the ability to pay for their goods, or pay their debts off and their taxes off in kind with goods. They're asking for the circulation of paper money because there's so little hard currency in the country. And the wealthy people in the country, the people who became the class of people that ended up in Philadelphia in 1787 to write the Constitution, are horrified by this. They think it leads to the, as I said, violates contracts. It undermines creditworthiness. And it also lets people, from their perspective, get lazy, slothful. Maybe you're spending too much money on gambling and whiskey. And there's one document that the historian Woody Holton talks about where women in particular being blamed for buying like high fashions and indulging.
Women be shopping even in the revolutionary times.
Women be shopping specifically, as he said, for artificial rumps. This was a louche importation from Europe that was getting people to spend more money than they should. So Familiarly, people are responding to real economic discontent with disdain and a refusal to really give people relief. Fortunately, though, in the state legislatures, people are petitioning for relief pretty successfully in most states, with the exception of Massachusetts. And in Massachusetts, you actually have a tax increase. Legislature defies the popular revolt. This leads to an uprising, which people may remember from school, Shays Rebellion. That's eventually put down, horrifies the founders even more. And we have letters from Washington and other people saying, well, this has given us reason to doubt that democracy or democratic governance is sound. Maybe we should move to a monarchical system of government again. These are direct quotes from documents you have that people don't really talk about. So the project of the Constitutional Convention, 1787, is to fundamentally rework the country's governing order. You have at the federal level, before then, the Articles of Confederation, which were truly stupid. I mean, people are making that up. That's not, you had to get supermajorities to pass anything of note. You need unanimity to amend the thing. You couldn't really do it, force the states to do anything. You're asking for them to comply with federal policies. That really needed to change. But the thing that the founders thought they needed to change the most was, the federal government had been kind of inactive, impotent, relative to these far more democratic state governments. The federal government had no capacity to act directly upon the American people and had no capacity to ask them for taxes directly either. And so they want a different political order where there'll be a sovereign federal government that is not democratically accessible. That's the kind of balance that they're trying to strike. And they talk openly from the very first speech at the convention about how what had brought them there was an excess of democracy. Or in Hamilton's words on the draft of the Constitution in 1787, a system designed to fight against, in his words, the depredations which a democratic spirit is apt to make on property. Hamilton at the Constitutional Convention. So none of this is hidden. None of this is conspiratorial. We have Madison's notes at the convention. We have letters that people were writing back and forth. We have the Federalist Papers. I mean, a lot of this stuff is open, or sort of open to read even today. But we have a way of talking about the Constitution, obviously in the founding, that is reverential and it treats the thing as a sacred compromise put together by men of principle. And that's just not what happened. They were men, political figures responding to a particular political and economic situation on the basis of their own position in American society. These are the wealthiest, most educated Americans, or among the most wealthy, most educated Americans in the country at the time. So they crafted a system that served their interests.